While you're watching gas prices jump 20 cents per liter, there's another price shock happening that most Canadians don't even know about. Fertilizers. Fertilizer prices have spiked 60% since the war began. Spring planting is happening right now, with farmers paying double what they paid last fall. And here's the scary part. You won't see this hit your groceries until May or June. By then, food prices could jump another 5 to 10% on top of everything else. This is the hidden crisis nobody's talking about. Let me explain what's happening. Welcome back to KP Money Talks, and today we're uncovering the fertilizer crisis that's going on, and it's going to make your food significantly more expensive over the next few months. This isn't about gas prices. Everybody sees that. This is about the supply chain disruption that's hitting Canadian farmers right now during spring plantation, and it's going to devastate your grocery budget by the summer. Hit subscribe button and let's get into it. Here's what most people are missing. The Strait of Hormuz isn't an oil checkpoint. It's a fertilizer checkpoint. The Middle East, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and Iran supplies about 25% of global nitrogen fertilizer trade. Nearly 50% of world's urea and sulfur exports pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Since Iran effectively blockaded the strait on February 28th, those fertilizer shipments have stopped completely. Cody, a farmer who operates a 7,000-acre farm near Ogema, Saskatchewan, he told CBC News his fertilizer costs have spiked 60% from last fall. A big increase on input price. Stuart Person, an agriculture business advisor with MMP, explained it bluntly. If you don't get spikes in wheat, canola, corn, and soybean prices to offset these fertilizer cost spikes, it's going to be a tough year. And all this is happening at one of the worst possible timings. Tyler McCann, managing director of the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute, said that this is the worst year for Canadian farmers to face this shock. This is probably the worst year that these financial impacts could be felt on Canadian farms than what we've had in the last decade, said McCain. Because unlike 2022, when rising input costs were offset by strong commodity prices, 2026 is shaping up very differently. Farmers are getting squeezed with high costs but weak crop prices. And making matters worse is Canada still has tariff on Russian fertilizer imports, adding approximately $100 per metric ton compared to US farmers. This puts Canadian producers at a competitive disadvantage during a global fertilizer shortage. Let me explain exactly how this crisis works, because understanding the mechanics shows you why this is serious. Fertilizer production requires natural gas. Nitrogen fertilizers, the most important nutrient for crop, is made from natural gas. The process converts natural gas into ammonia, which then becomes urea and other nitrogen products. The Middle East has historically dominated fertilizer production because they have massive natural gas reserves and cheap energy. The triple shock. The Canadian farmers are getting hit three ways simultaneously. 1. Supply disruption. Fertilizer from the Middle East can't get through the Strait of Hormuz. Global supply has tightened dramatically. Number 2. Energy price spike. Natural gas prices are significantly up, making fertilizer production more expensive everywhere, not just the Middle East. And 3. Transportation cost. Diesel fuel is up 20 to 30 cents per liter, making it more expensive to transport fertilizers that are available. John Newtons, head of agriculture at ADB Financial, explained that the impact varies by region. Quote, the impact is going to be felt in Eastern Canada a bit more quickly than it would be in the Western, on the increase in nitrogen costs. In the West, we are domestically supplied. End quote. But even Western Canada, which produces its own fertilizer, is subject to global commodity prices. When prices spike globally, Canadian fertilizer producers charge global prices, not discounted domestic rates. Farm financial health. Before this crisis even began, farm financial health was deteriorating. Farm Credit Canada established fertilizer would account for 20 to 25% of total crop production costs in 2026, before the war. Now, with the 60% increase, the percentage is significantly higher, crushing profit margins for farmers across Canada. And here's the question you've been looking for. When will this hit your wallet? Short term, minimal impact in the next 2 to 3 months. Stuart Smith, an agriculture and resource economics professor at the University of Saskatchewan, told CBC that short term grocery prices are shielded by pre existing contracts. In the short term, over the next 2 to 3 months, the impact would be pretty minimal, definitely well under 1%. Midterm, May to July. The shock hits. But here's where it gets scary. If this conflict extends into April, then we should start to expect it having an impact on food prices, though that probably wouldn't show up until May, June, or July. That's when the 2026 harvest, planted right now with expensive fertilizer and diesel, starts hitting grocery stores. And long-term impact, yield reduction. If farmers reduce fertilizer application to save money, which many are considering, crop yields will fall 6 to 12 months later. Lower yields mean tighter crop supply and even higher prices. The World Hunger Education Services warns that sustained 40 to 60% fertilizer price increases cause farmers to under-apply nutrients, translating to yield losses downstream. What foods will be affected the most? Mike Juan Masso, a professor at the University of Guelph, told CTV News that transportation makes up to 3.5% of retail food prices on average. But for fresh fruits and vegetables imported from southern US and Central America, it's closer to 10%. Expect the biggest price increases on fresh produce imported from US, Mexico, Central America, bread and grain products, meat, and dairy. Juan Massa predicted, produce is a perishable product. It's not in storage. It's being brought up regularly, and so the increased costs will be passed on to consumer. I expect within a week or two. That's already happening. This isn't just a Canadian problem. It's a global food crisis in the making. Sub-Saharan Africa. Over 90% of the fertilizer consumed in Sub-Saharan Africa is imported, mostly from outside the continent. Countries like Nigeria, Kenya, Ethiopia are facing catastrophic food price increases. Raj Patel, a research professor at the University of Texas, warned, the poorest and most densely populated regions are likely to suffer the most. South and Southeast Asia. Major agriculture economies like India, Bangladesh, Thailand, and Indonesia rely heavily on imported fertilizers from the Gulf. Rice and maize, staples for billions, are among the most fertilizer-intensive crops. Brazil's impact on global markets. Brazil imports 85% of its fertilizer. If this war drags on during Brazil's key fertilizer import season, it will ripple through global soybean and maize markets, eventually impacting Canadian food prices as global commodity prices rise. Qatar plant shutdown. Adding to the crisis, Qatar was forced to halt production at one of the world's biggest urea plants. As of 2022 data, Qatar's synthetic nitrogen fertilizer export were keeping nearly 43 million people fed in the US, Brazil, and India alone. The IMF and World Bank warnings. The International Food Policy Research Institute warned that higher energy and input costs risk reigniting the global food inflation just as retail food prices had returned to more historical levels. The World Bank reported fertilizer prices gained 6.5% in February 2026 alone before the full impact of war hit. So what can a Canadian family actually do about this? Number 1. Stock up on non-perishable now. Before May-June when prices spike, stock up on canned goods, pasta and rice, flour and baking supplies, frozen vegetables, and long-lasting produce like potatoes, onions, and carrots. If you have storage space and budget flexibility, buying now locks in current prices. Number 2. Adjust your food budget. Plan for 5 to 10% higher food costs for mid-2026. If you currently spend $800 per month on groceries, budget $840 to $880 to avoid surprises. Number 3. Buy Canadian and local when possible. Transportation costs are a big driver of imported food price increases. Canadian produced foods will see smaller increases than imported produce. Hit farmers markets, join CSA programs, and prioritize local meat and dairy. Number 4. Consider growing your own. Even a small garden can offset hundreds in grocery costs. Tomatoes, lettuce, herbs, and peppers are easy to grow and expensive at stores. And if you have space, consider expanding to potatoes, beans, and squash. Number 5. Meal plan and reduce waste. With food getting more expensive, food waste becomes even more costlier. Canadians waste about $1,300 per household annually on food that goes bad. Meal planning and using leftovers strategically can save hundreds as price rises. Number 6. Watch for substitution opportunities. As certain foods spike in price, others become relatively cheap. Be flexible with recipes and substitute expensive ingredients. If beef prices surge, shift to chicken, pork, or plant-based proteins that are less affected. The bottom line is that the Middle East war is creating a hidden fertilizer crisis that will spike Canadian food prices 5 to 10% by mid-2026, hitting your grocery bill harder than gas prices. Farmers are planting right now with 60% higher fertilizer costs. Those costs will hit your wallet in May, June, and July, just in time for summer. Stock up on non-perishables now, budget for high food costs, and buy local when possible, and prepare your family for what's coming. If this warned you about something you didn't know that was coming, hit that like button and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one.